And welcome to Breakthrough Walls. I am Ken Walls and I'm your host. And man, I have got a really special guest on today. We've been trying to coordinate this for a while and we finally did it. I want to welcome my friend Melanie Klein to the show. Melanie, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Ken. Hello, everybody. Happy
You're
Monday.
awesome. Yes. And Happy New Year.
Absolutely. Happy New Year to you.
New year, new me.
I love that you actually said that because sometimes that can actually send a really jacked up message to people. And I had a wonderful woman, Dr. Celisa Flores, who wrote a great blog recently called New Year Same Me. And I think there's a lot to be said for we can show up and do new things, but not make the old us wrong. So that's already my first tidbit I'm going to throw out there for you today, Ken.
I love it. I love it. So, I created this show about a year and a half or so ago, maybe almost 2 years. Geez. And it's really been about giving back to the world and helping people get unstuck. And I know you do that. I do that. I want to talk about you today, though. I want to start with like where you were born and raised. I know you're out in sunny California, right?
I am.
And I can see the sun peeking behind the thing over there.
Yep.
I'm in Ohio. The sun shines here like 3 days out of the year. So
yeah, well, definitely live vicariously. I just had to close the curtains because it is so bright today, actually, that it would have messed up our lighting today. But yeah, it's beautiful here in Santa Monica.
So talk about where you are, where you were born and raised.
Yeah. And before I do, I just want to say, Ken, I absolutely adore that you have created this show, like you said, real people, real talk to help others get unstuck. Because I firmly believe that one of the most powerful things that we have is our own personal narrative when we can connect to the hearts and minds of other people and we can see ourselves, our struggles, our obstacles reflected. So just, I really appreciate that you offer this platform for folks. So
I love doing it. I get so much energy from it, like good energy. People reaching out going, man, that guest you had on said blah 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 and it changed my life. And just I love waking people up, and I know you do too.
Yes, I do. So yeah, and I think that goes back to, like you said, where was I born and raised and how did I kind of get here? So I was born in Los Angeles, and yet when I was 6 months old, went to Germany with my mother, who is German, and we moved there. And I lived there for the first 6 years of my life, and then we ended up coming back to the United States, something that I definitely did not want to do. I was very happy living there with my extended family, and I think that was my first big hiccup was moving to this country, or back to this country, I should say. So, different culture, different family dynamics, just everything was so much of a shock to me that I think I became very quickly interested in sort of how people live and how not every society lives the same way and how there's different values. And so there was this sort of keen awareness that already began when I was very young. And then when I was 8, I started actually flying by myself back and forth to Germany as an unaccompanied minor. So I'd go on, I'd go on the airplane by myself, and at the time
to the U.S.
But yeah, back and forth. Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
Yeah, my mom came in one night, after we had moved to Los Angeles and found me crying in bed and asked me, why I was upset. And I said, I missed my family in Germany. And then she asked me, how long have you been upset? How long have you been crying in bed? And I told her I'd been crying in bed for weeks.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So she was like, okay, I think we need to do something. And so apparently she and my grandparents made an arrangement, and I would spend the school year with my parents, and then I would spend the entire 2 to 3 months of the summer break with my living with my grandparents and, being with my aunt and uncle and everyone. So I started doing that at a very young age, which was also super unusual. And it wasn't done out of the sense of entitlement, like I am, this sort of young child who travels to Europe for the summer, right? It
Yeah.
was very much came from a working class blue collar family that realized it was very important for me to be in both places. And so it was just the norm for me to live in two different places, two different cultures, speak two different languages, and to be quite honest, also not only raised with different culturally value systems, but my parents and my grandparents were so different that I very quickly was moving back and forth between these different lifestyles and ways of seeing the world. And while there was definitely some confusion and led to some of the obstacles in my life, certainly it gave me a perspective on all the different ways that we can live, all the different ways that we can relate as people. And I feel like it gave me the opportunity to pull some of the best qualities from all the six adults that raised me, my parents, my grandparents, my aunt and uncle. And I'm
And
sure that,
that's wow.
yeah.
So you speak German too.
Yeah, my son goes to a German school. He's 10 and he went to a German preschool and he goes to a German immersion school here in Los Angeles. So it was very important for me to continue to have my own son have the benefit of living biculturally, if you will. And
Wow.
so I took him for the first time when he was about 10 months old to Germany. We've gone every year and he speaks German and writes and reads in German. And
Oh
yeah, and
my gosh.
national school where not only do they have German immersion, but Spanish. And the kids come from all sorts of different countries and backgrounds. It's really wonderful.
Wow, that's incredible. I've
Mm-hmm.
only known, and I would never put you in the same category, but I know one other German woman. She's a much, much, much older lady, and her and her husband were clients of mine years ago.
Uh-huh.
He was such he's just a happy-go-lucky, super nice guy. They're from Germany, but live here
Mm-hmm.
in the US. And she was not like at all. Like she was just this stout, not, I mean, I think I made her smile once, and I love to make people smile. I was like, I think I said something like, if you smile, your face might shatter. And she smiled. Like,
Well, I have to say, yeah, that's the thing. Very different culturally in terms of,
mhm.
Americans. Even when I would come back after months away, the affect is so much more effusive. Even in restaurants, it was like, whoa, like very, very different.
Yeah,
And I think that's part of the benefit. There is a lot of rigidity in a lot of different ways there, and that's actually why my mother, who is German, left and came to the United States and was like this young hippie in the late 60s, early 70s who wanted to leave conservative Germany. And yet what I found is like that helped temper,
yeah,
I think, what could have been a very like linear approach. And at the same time, gave me a really wonderful container where my parents were much more loosey goosey, were not very structured. And so that's what I mean by having that experience of growing up in two countries with two different value systems and really different sets of adults. I was able to kind of give a little more of a container to the looseness of what my parents had going on at home, and it gave me a little more I would say a little bit of flow and ease that would temper some of the rigidity. And so in that way, I think I was also an anomaly to both cultures as well. But
yeah.
I feel like it's benefited me in the long run, even though there were a lot of times where I definitely did not feel that I fit in when I moved to the States. As a kid, I
Yeah.
definitely was like, yeah, I'm definitely different. There's something different going on here.
Well, you're a kind German woman.
Thank you very
Well,
much.
see, you've changed my entire perception of the German women.
I love it because that is part of what I like to do. I love to shatter paradigms and stereotypes
I'm
that we
I'm
have.
gonna get I'm gonna get hate mail from German women now.
I was thinking, I'm like, you might get some flack for that, Ken, but I know you can handle it. And like I said, I really like to, as a woman and as a sociologist, a women's studies professor, and as a coach, I love shattering stereotypes and paradigms that we have. Is really
Wow.
like, how can we think outside of that box and
Yeah.
see something different? So I'm glad that you've had that experience with me today already.
Yeah. Well, I had that experience with you in San Diego when we were both out there. So like growing up, I've always, I mean, look, you already know this. I think that I know this, and I can't scientifically prove it, but I think that what goes on with us humans as children, the adults around us and the teachers, the preachers, the nuns, the rabbis, the everybody that's in a
Mhm.
child's life kind of, I don't want to say dictates, but helps form what that person becomes as an adult, right? And
Mhm.
so with you, and I'm not saying like, maybe your parents said you're going to be a doctor and you were a rebel and you're like, no, I'm going to be a homeless person instead. And right. So I'm not, so it could go the opposite also. Right.
Sure. Sure.
So with you, what do you feel like from childhood? Because that's really like, that's seriously diverse. I mean,
Yeah.
you experience two completely different cultures. What do you feel from childhood kind of paved the way for what you became as an adult?
First of all, I love that question. As a sociologist, I just completely geek out on it because, obviously you're saying it in different language than I would. So I'm going to put it in my language and answer that question at the
Yeah.
same time. You're really talking about socialization, right? The
Yeah.
process of socialization. How does our identity become formed? How does our sense of self become formed in this social environment and all the people and groups that, have an influence on us? And I think people forget that it's sometimes not just the obvious things. People think about parents and they think about like, oftentimes maybe religion and the media, but it's everything around us, our neighborhood, who we interact with in the neighborhood, our peer group, plus
Yeah.
the media, all those things together overtly and covertly or in obvious ways and subtle ways begin to kind of create all of those imprints over and over again that allow us to form our sense of self and the way that we see the world. And so for me, first and foremost, it's very obvious that being in two different places and having those different value systems, and to be honest, going to school, I went to school in Germany in kindergarten, and then I did that in the States as well. Like having those different systems educationally and different peer groups. And of course, what I had access to in the media was very different. I
Yeah.
grew up in a country that at the time we didn't even have television available 24 hours a day.
Wow.
There was only certain programming at certain times a day. So all of that had an impact. And then I would say really the most formative thing would be my maternal grandparents in
Mm.
terms of they were very solid, dynamic people, very truly incredible people, I have to say. My grandmother was not the average woman of her time either. And, it was when I was around 12 or 13, it came out that she had been married prior to my grandfather. And I was like, what? You were married to someone else? And it turned out that she actually, she was an American woman in the late 40s who had married a Welsh sailor because she wanted to escape her very sort of oppressive household with her father.
Yeah.
And she was one of the first to sail over on the Queen Mary. And when she went to Wales, where they were living at the time, it came out that she was going to be expected to not go to university and learn how to be a proper Welsh housewife. So she ended up fleeing. Her first husband had to file a missing persons report because she decided, I am not going to do this. So
Wait,
here
she
she is.
fled her husband?
Yeah, she
Oh,
left.
wow.
And she went to
Wow.
London and was working in a travel agency. And she was an artist in London. And at that point, there was just so much, the war was still going on. There was so much there was so much upheaval, if you will. She said it was a very exciting time, that she'd come from a very proper white Anglo-Saxon Protestant household. Her father was a self-made, successful businessman. And there were certain dictates about what a young woman like her was expected to be. And she essentially was like, F that. The war is a great excuse to do what I want. And at that
Wow.
time, she met my grandfather, who was a German prisoner of war at the time. And they met. And then she ended up saying, well, you know what? When he was released, she smuggled herself into Germany at a time when Americans were not allowed. And she was the first woman at that time to marry a German POW after the war. And there were newspaper articles all over. I have copies of them. And so when she
Wow.
told me about being married to this her first husband, the Welsh soldier, and she brought out the newspaper articles. I had no idea. My grandparents were just like regular folk, right? But when I read that, I was just so astounded. And, in retrospect, it's like even before I knew my grandmother, there was something special. She had something really regal and exciting and adventurous about her. She nowhere where she went was she the average woman of the time, meaning she didn't fulfill the expectations. So
Yeah.
um, spending so much time with her was, I think, one of the most profound influences, and the fact that my grandfather also very much was excited by and loved that she was kind of wild, if you will.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know and so there was a lot of permission in that household to really explore myself as a woman. There was an expectation that I would, that I was smart, that I was artistic, that I could be adventurous. And it was not necessarily always said, forthrightly, but it was implied. I could see that. And that's what I mean by that, both overt and covert socialization.
Yeah.
And so I think that that really kind of set the stage for who I became today. I even think back when I was, I think, 12, my grandmother said, let's go on an adventure. And she pulled out our passports and she brought out a huge paper map, because this was, in the 80s.
Yeah.
And we mapped out the route from Germany to go to Strasbourg, France. And we left for the day. And I navigated that trip
Oh
with
my
the
God.
paper map.
In
And
a car, in a car.
car.
Oh
And we went to France for the day, and then we came. By the time we got back, it was midnight. It was a whole day excursion. There were
wow.
no cell phones at the time. She just said to my grandfather, "Mel and I are taking an adventure. Don't ask where we're going. We'll just be back." And he's like, "Oh, okay. There goes Connie with one of her things." And she's my namesake. That's my middle name. I'm Melanie Connie
Uh,
Klein.
that's
And
awesome.
so, I would do things like that with my grandmother, and it was really exciting. And she would, we would spend a lot of time in nature. She would recite poetry like, Keats and Shelley and all of these wonderful things. And she was a painter, and she would knit, and she gardened, and she did all of this wonderful stuff that really kind of, I think, allowed me to have a very broad and complex idea of what I could become. And
Wow.
then I want to give proper credit to my father's mother, to my paternal grandmother. While I did not spend as much time with her, she was one of the first women in the United States in the early 60s to divorce her husband when they had 5 kids. Okay. She
Wow.
had she had 5 kids under the age of 7, I think, by the time she was 26 years old. And she, her husband was going to get his degrees at USC, and he became a huge engineer here in LA. And she had her own aspirations that, because she was a mother of 5, she wasn't able to fulfill. So she made a decision way before, I would say, the second wave of feminism, where the women's liberation movement started. And she
Yeah.
divorced her husband. They split up the kids. He took the 3 boys, she took the 2 girls. She pursued her own career, and then she became a world traveler. She hiked Mount Kilimanjaro.
Jeez.
She walked from LA to Washington, D.C. in 1985 over 9 months for nuclear disarmament as part of
Oh,
the Great Peace March. So I have to say that I don't have your usual upbringing. The women in my life, even my mother, who, left her, quote, conservative German household and came to LA and met this dude, this hippie dude, my dad. I had a lot of different examples of what it could mean to be a woman,
yeah.
what that might mean for my family structure, what that might mean for my career. And so, yeah, that is the most profound influence that I had. And there's many others, but I'd say the most profound influence on who I am today, and honestly, the work that I do today.
And those are actually some massive influences. I mean,
Yes.
when you have that much diversification in, I mean, That's crazy. I did not know all that.
Can
And
I
I don't
say,
mean crazy in a bad way, by the
oh
way.
no,
Like,
absolutely. And Ken, I have to say, I love that you asked me, because as I was sharing these stories, I was thinking to myself, I don't think I've ever shared that in a public interview. Like, I've
well,
shared little bits about my grandmothers, and I certainly tell some of these stories to friends. But I actually really love the fact that I've had the opportunity to share some of that and kind of excavate some of that history today.
yeah.
Because, while I love it, I usually oftentimes answer a lot of the same questions in interviews about my work. And so this is really fun for me because, like I said, I think our personal stories are just, all of them are interesting. Everybody has something wonderful to share. And so being able to talk about both of my grandmothers today and even share that road trip to France is it's a pretty fun way to actually start the new year by reflecting on how I got here.
Well, and I think, I think a lot of people, a lot of people live in the past. In other words, they get stuck in the pain, the painful parts of it, and don't move far beyond that. And I've thought about this a lot. I've been in counsel. I was in counseling for years as a teenager, and going through like processing all of the stuff, the bad stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And today, I think I've shared with most of my audience that, I have 17 and a half years of sobriety and recovery. And, I used to blame the bad stuff. That's why I drink it. And now it's like, that's what created me. That's what actually formed me into the empathetic and probably certain levels of intelligence and awareness that I wouldn't have had otherwise, right?
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
it gives me a unique perspective. And I think that, and I love that because I've never been to Europe. My wife speaks French, so
Mm-hmm.
she's spent a lot of time in France, but I've never been there, and I've always admired people that have traveled throughout Europe, and I think that's amazing. So I love that part of your story. So let me ask. So you went to elementary school and middle school, high school, all of that in California, right?
I did. Yeah.
Okay. And then
Typical Valley girl.
yeah, like, oh my God. like,
Absolutely. I hung
like
out at the
totally.
Galleria, the whole deal.
I love that.
Hmm.
So you went to college because I know now you're a college professor.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
forgot about that until you said that a few minutes ago. So I forgot you're a college professor. Oh my gosh, I feel so dumb now.
You're perfect, Ken. I mean, listen, I will say it's like, first of all, I think there's something really important about, like you said, having real people, real talk, real stories. I love that. Because we all have something powerful to share. And too often people get caught up in these hierarchies about who's more credible, who's more intelligent, who has
Yeah,
more to offer. We all have something so beautiful to offer. And some of the most important people in my life were not college educated. In fact, one of my yoga teachers who I met in 1996 and practiced with, one of my mentors, we're still great friends, he was a high school dropout. And he is one of the most wise, profound people
yeah,
world and in my life. So I think there's something really important to be said about how, if we can all step to the table and see that we all have equal worth and value, then we will get so much further in our own healing as a culture, because
amen.
we're able to really reap the benefits of everyone. And
Yeah,
that's, to be honest, it's been one of my big missions. I really mean that sincerely. When I ended up going into community college, that happened after, like you said, I had gone to elementary, middle, and high school, private schools here in Southern California. My father felt it was really important, especially as someone who, I didn't speak English when I moved back here at that point, to be in a private school. He had gone to LA public schools and he wanted me to go there. And then very quickly found that he loved the kind of education I was getting. So I continued. And I'll be quite honest, Ken, I thought, God, given my peer group, especially in high school, I thought I was stupid. I mean, all of my peers ended up going to like Cornell and NYU and Stanford, and they were very clear on where they wanted to go right out of high school. And I had no clue at that point. I mean, I did well as a student, but I will be very honest, Ken, I didn't really work too hard as a student. It was kind of easy for me. So I did the bare minimum, and I would get an A. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I kind of was able to, skim by. And then when it was time to get ready for college, I had two parents who were not college educated.
Right.
My mother, first of all, was from a different country. So her thing was always like, hey, I don't speak English. I didn't go to school here. I'm not sure how to help you. My dad was a carpenter, right? And who had graduated from the local high school. My parents had me when they were 21. He needed to work. And so I didn't have any, I would say, guidance around going into college. Their best effort was sending me to a college prep school. And yet I didn't really seek out the guidance that I needed. So I was like, well, where do I go? So I went to the local college, dropped out after a year, moved to Hawaii, had no clue what I was doing. And then after living in Hawaii for a few months, I went, okay, this is certainly not it either. I'm going to go back. I didn't know what to do given that I had dropped out of college. And someone's like, oh, you can go to the local community college. And thus began my love affair with, honestly, community colleges. And that's where I met my first mentor. Hey, Holly, thanks for watching. And that was a time where I think my self-esteem was really bolstered around what I could be by my first mentor in community college. Because coming out of high school, I'll be honest, I was just dumbfounded by the entire process. I felt confused. And as a result, I didn't feel honestly smart enough to do much. And I'll even say that I think one of my biggest goals at the time was I was hoping I would marry someone who could take care of me, because I really didn't think I could take care of myself. And then that all changed when I went to community college and, got older. But it's sort of a wonderful example of, you can think that you're not bright. You can think you're not smart. You can think that you're not capable. And not only is that not true, you can absolutely change that reality as you start to do some of the deeper work, which is what I started to do at that time.
But I have a question, and you're a
Mhm.
professor of sociology.
Sociology and women's studies, although I only teach about two on the ground classes now. I've done that for 17 years. And for the last few years, my primary work is having a full roster of coaching clients at this point.
Okay. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I shared with you, I didn't graduate high school.
Mhm.
I had all college prep courses, but they said biology is a requirement. And I'm like, yeah, I didn't like that
I would probably
really.
feel the same way.
Yeah. And they're like, well, you have to have it to graduate. And I'm like, that's stupid. I'm never going to dissect a frog again, you idiots. But anyway, whatever. So I walked out, and so, and for a long time I felt like really less than. But,
Mhm.
since then I've employed a whole lot of college graduates that we won't even go there. But
Oh, I get you.
I won't go there. But I think that we're, as a society, I think we put so much ridiculous pressure on 18 and 19-year-old children, because they're still
Agree.
children, on what they should be. And it's like, dude, I didn't. I'm 51 years old and I'm still not sure what I should be. No, I'm kidding. But like, I think
Yeah.
we put way too much pressure on an 18-year-old to say, hey, man, go. You're going to be a dentist. Go to dental school, get $300,000 in debt, and go work on people's teeth, or whatever it is. And I might be wrong, but I actually saw a video. Somebody way smarter than me put out a video talking about this the other day. And I was like, we're pressuring our kids. Do you agree or not?
I do. I don't think everyone has the same trajectory at all. I mean, there were a few things going through my mind as you were talking that actually even goes back to earlier questions that I didn't completely answer yet. But one of them is, I've met some PhDs who I am completely unimpressed with. I have met people, like I mentioned, my yoga teacher, you being one of them as well, who are profoundly knowledgeable and capable and have so much to offer, who did not graduate high school. My father, who does have a high school education, also incredibly sharp, incredibly talented, right? Did not go to college. So I think that we make this, sort of one-dimensional measure of success and a one-dimensional measure of, what it means to sort of fulfill our life purpose. And I think that's really problematic. I think about my own son a couple of years ago. He was 8 at the time. We were driving the car. I mentioned something about college. He obviously knows that I'm a professor. He has gone to my classes since he was probably 2 or 3 years old, and seen his mom in action. But at one point he said, Mom, I don't know if I'm going to go to college. And I looked into the rear view mirror as I was driving. I was like, oh, really? And he's like, yeah, I don't know if that's for me. And he's 8. And I said, okay, why is that? And we started talking, and he was talking about his art because he's an artist. I said, well, did you know that there are art colleges? I said, like the Otis College of Design here in Los Angeles. And he said, oh, and he paused and he said, so are you telling me there's a college where I can go and do art all day? I said, oh, yeah, you can learn different mediums. And we talked about it. So he was excited. And so that summer, I sent him to their youth summer camp. So he could
Wow.
have the experience of going to a real college. So he went to Otis College of Design the last 2 summers for these 2-week programs. But I've understood very early on, he's very different than I am. His brain works differently. He problem solves differently. He's incredibly bright. And yet, I mean, honestly, after this call with you, I'm going to go check out some math tutoring for him. He has, it doesn't work like that for him the way it worked for me, that I could just kind of, skid past everything and get A's. Like, he has
Yeah.
to work differently. And so I'm a firm believer that we really need to create, alternate measures, and we need to have a more expansive definition of success and fulfillment and what path that we can go on. It Not everyone has the same path. And I'll be honest, I was not necessarily a huge fan of college either. And a lot of what it's
That's your employer.
no, I tell my students, because here's the thing: a lot of the ways that I teach and I mentor and I coach, and the assignments and the points of execution that I give the people that I'm appointed to is very much to make sure that they don't do what I did. I make sure everything is relevant. I make sure that it really serves them. And ultimately, at the end of the day, my work in all those areas are about raising consciousness. That the best thing that can happen for me is if they walk out of my classroom or they complete their coaching contract with me and they have a newfound sense of awareness and a raised consciousness that allows them to make very authentic and integrous decisions on their own, then I'm like, my job is complete. And I feel like that's a lot more than I was given, although I was given a very good education. But there wasn't that much emphasis on that. That didn't come until I really found mindfulness practices. And I talk about how I landed in that community college classroom, which kind of helped me to have a new relationship with school and my own intelligence. And I found mindfulness practices. And between the two of them, that is really, aside from the women in my life, that becomes the next, I think, big, profound influence on my life is, how can I be a multidimensional human being? How can I be more than my brain or my body? How can I actually really, tap more into my intuition? How can I expand, my heart and my empathy? How can I become a more conscious human and get to know myself in a fully dimensional way? And so when I combined, the sociological imagination with, mindfulness and my yoga practice, that is really, I think, the unique alchemy that not only influences my work today, but definitely was the big game changer for my life. Because like you were saying, Ken, a lot of times we, hang on to the past. And I certainly know I did. And I was very resentful around the fact that I had to move to this country that I didn't want to move to. I was resentful around a lot of things.
Yeah.
And then I decided that that's not going to help me. And I needed to grow. And this was the time where I grew intellectually, spiritually, and personally. And I recognized how valuable actually my upbringing was, that I have sort of equal measure street smarts, spiritual insight, and, kind of academic learning. And thank you, Susan. That is like the biggest compliment you can give me.
I know. I probably would have too.
That is yeah.
I
And
second that,
so
Susan.
Yes, and that's what I want to offer, the people who work with me one-on-one and my students and people that I mentor is um yeah, I want to make sure that they are able to come authentically into themselves, and
Yeah.
by being able to speak in academic jargon, yet at the same time relate to people of many different socioeconomic classes and ethnic backgrounds has been very beneficial, because I have made sure that the people who are in front of me, either on the computer screen or in the seats, feel seen. I feel that's one of the most important things we can offer people, is that they really feel witnessed, seen, and feel very heard. And that's one of my biggest missions, because I know when that happens and people really begin to flourish and
Yeah.
thrive
Yeah.
in who they are, we as a society all benefit from the gifts that they have to offer. Otherwise, we miss them personally, and we miss them as a group.
I agree. I agree. I told you that and I don't even remember why, but sociology was like my favorite subject in school. And
It's the jam.
the only thing that I remember from, and this sociology in high school, but was and I told you this and you looked at me like no, there's so much more to it than that. But it was the tell the story to somebody, and then they tell somebody, and they tell somebody, and then by the time it went around the whole class, it came back, and it was not even remotely even close to the same story. I forget what that was, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, you did that exercise in your high school social class?
Yeah, yeah. Where the teacher takes the first student out in the hall, tells them a story, and then they tell, and then and by the end, it was like, it wasn't even close to the same story. Like it
Well,
was,
it's like the adult version of telephone. And when
yeah,
it comes to sociology, it's just really understanding how you can have something happen, or politically or economically, or we can read or watch something or witness something in person, and three people are going to walk away with three different experiences of that,
yes,
because we are not unbiased. Even in our own lives, we are coming to the table with everything that we've learned, everything that we've taken in up until that point.
right,
And that's our filter, or that's our lens, right? And
right,
so that is why, actually, Ken, I love that you brought that up, why my mindfulness practice was so powerful, because as I was intellectually understanding and deconstructing the ways in which I had learned things about the world, or the ways in which I'd come to know myself as a woman, or the ways in which my self identity was constructed. It was one thing to understand it and analyze it, but going into mindfulness and embodied practices, that's where I learned to feel and experience something else. So that's why, coupled together, it really allowed me to, when I was talking about kind of challenging paradigms, challenge and reframe my reality. It's how I was able to, on a multi-dimensional level, begin to break down those paradigms and construct new ones that were more of my choosing, as
right,
opposed to the ones that I had essentially taken in. Because when we think about socialization, what we are in essence are doing is we are internalizing society and its norms into us,
yeah,
to the point where we think it's normal as opposed to normative, where we think, well, this is just how things are naturally. It's like, no, it didn't grow that way. No,
no,
there's nothing natural about it. We've internalized it so deeply that it becomes an expectation, a norm, as
yep,
opposed to something normal. And so this also relates to then my work, in terms of empowering folks, both as a professor, a writer, and as an empowerment coach, is that actually we get to create this new level of awareness, and then we get to choose. We get to have choice into the equation, and we can empower ourselves to see things differently. We can begin to see things more clearly, and we can choose the things that we really want to do and say, as opposed to the things that we have been enculturated with, the things that we have learned from our parents, from the church, the mosque, the temple, from the media, whatever it happens to be. And that was what was so powerful, is that I went from a place of feeling like I couldn't amount to more than someone's wife, to, oh, I can actually do a lot, and that my voice can be incredibly important. I would have never imagined 25, 30 years ago that I would have had written books, that I would have edited books, that I would have community platforms, that I would be a professor, that I would be coaching incredibly high level, high performing people to their next spot. That all came through that unique combination of the, really developing the intellect and developing my mindfulness practices and realizing I had a lot more control and choice than I imagined.
And I love that you are, and gosh, I don't even know how to say this. So please don't anybody hate me for what I'm getting ready to say.
Oh no.
No, but
I
like
love the disclaimer, Ken. I love the
I
disclaimer.
know. But like there's a lot of women that are, and I don't want to say feminists or because I don't want, I hate labels, but there's a lot of women that say similar things like I found my, and you can tell they're like pissed off
Mm-hmm.
at men, like you've held me back. And it's like, no, dude, you held yourself back. But like, do you watch you know who Dr. Joe Dispenza is, right?
Oh God, yes. I was just
I
listening to a podcast interview with him the other
Oh,
day.
I love him.
Me
He's going to
too.
be on my show. I'm putting that out to the universe.
Yes, let's
So,
manifest that, Ken.
so he talks about that. We're walking around. 60 to 80,000 thoughts per day,
Mm-hmm.
and that 90% of our thoughts that we have today are the same exact thoughts that we had yesterday.
That's right.
And I love this part. And that we're actually 50% of the stories we're telling ourselves are made up. They're not even true.
Oh my God, yes. Yes to all
And
of it.
we're embellishing the crap out of stuff that happened in the past that didn't even happen.
Yes. There's a few things I want to say. I don't know if you had a specific question or you're just bringing him up because
No, I'm just bringing him up because I love this guy.
yes, you've given me a lot already. I mean, you don't have to seed me too much to get a lot out of out of me,
I love it.
right?
And we're running out of time already. That's
I know. I
ridiculous.
was like looking at that. I'm like, what? We need 2 hours. But let me say a couple things. One, yes, that's absolutely true, which is why mindfulness practices are so powerful.
Yes.
It's not enough to just deconstruct or analyze or intellectualize things. As I was saying earlier, it's really important that we actually begin to go into, neurologically reprogramming and having a different embodied experience. So you're very much on point there. The other thing I wanted to say is, in sociology, there's a term that I love, or a theorem called the Thomas theorem. And it says that when people define situations as real, they're real in their consequences. So
Mm,
that kind of goes into that in terms of when we have been socialized a certain way, we have a certain set of values and a certain set of expectations, and we've had a certain set of experiences happen to us that we then really don't go into any situation objectively, and we have certain projections and expectations, and so when things happen we see them through that filter and we respond to them as if our belief system is true, and we make them true through our actions. So that's another
yeah.
kind of vein into what you were talking about that I want to share. In terms of what you were saying about women and anger, God, there's so much. That's like a whole interview on its
Nobody hate
own.
me, please. Don't hate me.
No, listen, here's the thing. Even in my classes, I'm really proud to say when I first started teaching women's studies in 2004, I had one young man in the class. And like I said, I only teach 2 on the ground classes a semester at a time now. But when I do, I almost have half my class men, because what
Wow.
I did very early on was create a container where everybody could come to the table. And I established the fact that we all want to be heard, that we want to be very open minded, and that we had a unique opportunity in the classroom to have someone like you say, hey, this is the experience I get, and be open to why is that? And how else could I see that? And to have a really great conversation that maybe we wouldn't have outside of that, that particular setting. And so, men and women of all backgrounds knew that they could come to my classroom, and it was a safe and brave space to have really complex and confronting conversations in a way that where there was no individual blame to be assigned, if you will.
Right.
Because with my sociology background, I, as I evolved as a feminist myself, I will say, Ken, when I started, I was fuck men, you're to blame. And, there was a lot of anger. There was a lot of anger. And I think it
Really?
was,
You've let go then.
Well, yeah, and I think my anger was really important. And I talk about anger a lot. And there's a lot of books that are out right now actually on women in anger that is really powerful that I'm happy to share with your listeners. I can put it in show notes or put comments. But sometimes, especially for marginalized groups, the anger is a catalyst. It's an energy. It's a momentum. And
Yep.
sometimes there's not room to speak out about the injustice because there's two things. You had said, yeah, you hold yourselves back. That's true and no. We do have structural obstacles, but at the same time, a lot of that becomes internalized. It's called internalized oppression. So
Yeah.
we're dealing with not only structural obstacles, right? But then we're also dealing with the ways in which we've come to believe that we're not capable, we're not worthy, et cetera, et cetera. So we
Yeah.
then, we may be held back structurally, but then we add to that by doubting ourselves, diminishing ourselves based on the cultural narrative that we're internalizing. And so one of the things that I do in my work is I do all the inner work, but I don't pretend that there's not outer work to do. So I advocate for structural and social change at the same time that I advocate that we do our own personal growth work. And that's where I think it's really powerful. So I no longer just assign individual blame because as a sociologist, I can't deny the fact, well, we live in a society, and a society is much bigger than any of us as individuals. And it's not so much individual men that are the problem, it's patriarchy as a system that's a problem. And not only is that system a problem for girls and women, that system is a problem for boys and men. It becomes limiting to boys and men as well in terms of the ways in which they feel that they can express themselves, or the ways in which they can communicate, or
Yep.
their own notions of what does it mean to be a man in our culture. So for me, when it was a very exciting and igniting time to allow my anger to move me into action in terms of my social justice work, in terms of my academic work, in terms of my personal work. And then as time went on, I realized, okay, this is a much bigger thing. This is actually about the culture that we live in, and how do we rewrite these narratives. How do we have a greater diversity of representation? How do we really shift our values? And that's why, in addition to doing my personal work and the growth work I do with my clients, I've also done a lot of advocacy work over the last 20 years in terms of representation, and who has a voice, and how diverse and full-bodied that voice is. So I like to work on multiple levels, and I think it's important for people to do that as well. Because on one hand, if we're only focusing on the system and not doing the personal growth work, there's a limitation. But if we're only doing the quote inner work and we're not paying attention to the outer world, there's also a limitation to that. So I think it's very important that we work on multiple levels and in multiple ways simultaneously to really, really, truly affect change for all of us.
Again, I think that, and personally, I think that if we, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the more that we focus on as a human race, like I
Mm-hmm.
look at these things like the crazies that are going into churches and schools and doing and I think, who did that to you? Like, and how could you be so stuck in that you would do something that horrendous? And I think about that stuff, and I think, what? I mean, we all are carrying, are bearing our own crosses, right? We're all walking around carrying this stuff, and it's like, how do we, on a societal scale, how do we like convince people, like, man, look at you, look at go meditate. Like seriously meditate, like it's there, the answers are there, like work on you, and
Mm-hmm.
go
Well,
ahead.
there's a few things, and it goes back to something you said earlier that I'm glad we're coming back to. On one hand, absolutely, there's the importance of that self growth work and that introspection, that self reflexivity,
Yeah.
learning how to train and control our minds and our actions. And yet, the truth is that's not necessarily something that is available in terms of even people knowing that or how to seek it out. I mean, that was not anything that was just landed in my lap. I sought that out, right?
Right.
For sure.
Right.
And so I do a lot of work around the accessibility to these practices and techniques, to making them much more democratic in nature so that everyone has access.
Yeah.
And we've definitely grown as a society to making sure that that's possible, but it's certainly not true everywhere, right?
Right. Right.
The other thing is, while we have that going on, we have to look at all of the different social variables. If we, we bring in social class, if we're bringing in, racial and ethnic background, we're bringing in all of these different things. And, beginning to when you were talking about how our self-identity grows, how our perception of self comes into play, and you had said, parents and this and that, and I said, for sure. And a lot of times, people are so quick to blame families for everything and parents for everything, especially mothers, to be quite honest, which
Right.
assumes that mothers are doing that kind of care work on their own. That's a whole
Yeah.
nother conversation.
Yeah.
But the truth is, we're all raising society's children. Every single one of us, even if we don't have children, even if we're just someone's neighbor, if we're someone's
Yep.
auntie or uncle, the media, like, in fact, if you actually do the math, children are spending less time with their parents or their guardians than they are with school and their tablets and things of
Yep.
that nature.
Yep.
So we really have to kind of zoom out, as opposed to going, well, what was wrong with those parents? It's like, it's actually just not about that. We
Right.
have to take a holistic look at how are we operating as a culture? What are our value systems? Where are the checks and balances?
Yeah.
And making these kinds of tools available, more accessible to people who are not just privileged enough to very easily get them.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And again,
So basically, it's all Cardi B's fault.
that would be reductionist, but yes.
I'm just kidding.
I know.
I'm totally kidding.
I know.
Yeah. No hate mail. No hate mail.
No hate mail. No, there's a lot going on, and I think people miss that. I think, to be honest, we're in an anti-intellectual phase in our country and as our culture, which I don't think is an accident. That is by design. I know that, however anyone voted politically in the 2008 and 2012 election, doesn't matter. The point was, a lot of people did not like that Obama was professorial and that he didn't give yes or no answers. He was not binary in nature. Our culture is like, give me a yes or no. And you're like, about this complex issue, there's a lot of ins and outs and what have you. How could you just give a yes or no? And so, in the same way, people are like, I just want the single solution. It's the parents' fault. It's the mom's fault. It's Cardi B's fault. It's, it's rock and roll's fault. I mean, go back to the that was the refrain.
Yeah.
It's like,
it's Elvis. Still.
Right, exactly. We need to be able to think bigger and become more critical thinkers and more conscious citizens, which is why I'm so passionate about this work. And I've also done a lot in the realm of media literacy education, because I feel like we're in a time and space where, a large swath of this country is not prepared to think, critically or analytically. They're very much thinking in terms of binaries and yes or no's. And if they can't fit it into one box or the other, they look for a scapegoat to make it easier.
That's that's somewhat normal. I think that's fairly normal. So I cannot believe we're out of time. I mean, you're out of time. I'm not. I got all day, but I know you have to go. But let me ask you, and I ask all my guests these, and so we're gonna have to answer these quickly.
Yeah, please.
I have had in life, in business, and just in life, many times where there was more month than there was money. There was more, I've had a car repossessed in front of employees that work for me. I mean, I've had all kinds of, challenges and wanted to give up, wanted to stop, wanted to just go, you know what, let me just go settle for a paycheck somewhere or whatever. Like, and I'm nothing against somebody that has a paycheck. I'm just not cut out for that. But for the person that is struggling right now, that just can't seem to grasp a hold of the horns of success, and we'll say the gauge is financial, but we know there's a lot more to it than that. What do you say to that person to help them push through, keep going, and not give up?
I think one of the most important things is to really dig down deep inside and feel like, what are you really driven towards? Like, what is compelling you? Because I know for me, there were so many times I dealt with so much adversity, including financially, and wanted to give up and just like lay down, right? And yet I felt compelled and I kept kind of answering the call about what was compelling me and driving me forward. And I just kept going and looking for the next thing that was going to give me the insight or the possibility to get to the next thing. So there was just a really deep commitment to what I felt was driving me in terms of my purpose. And that became more important than all the obstacles. I was very clear that I wanted more than what I was experiencing, and that even though I didn't know how it was going to happen, that there was a way around that. And I've done that for the last 25, 26 years at this point, and it's served me incredibly well. It serves my clients well, so it's like keep coming back to the desire and the drive.
Love that. To the person that maybe their car was repoed last week and their electric's getting shut off tomorrow, and they're losing hope, because let's face it, we have an epidemic of suicide in this country as well. That calls you and says, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I've lost all hope and I don't know which way to turn. What do you say to them in that moment and I'm sure there's a lot of questions, but what do you say to give that person hope, like to keep going?
I think to distill it, because you said there's a lot more. It just came to me as you were asking the questions. I was like, these 3 C's came up: get creative, get curious, and connect. Those have really worked well for me, is to reach out when I don't want to reach out, make connections when the last thing I want to do is talk to anybody and I just want to hide under the covers, like connect. Creativity and curiosity has been great for me, where I'm like, okay, I'm only looking at this one way, from one angle, one perspective. I'm only seeing one kind of solution and starting to kind of push those boundaries out. What are all the different ways that I can deal with this? How can I get creative? How can I get curious about the ways I can get creative? And I found that to also work incredibly well for me. And I think there's some incredible power for people to harness there.
Get creative. I love that. People don't understand. I mean, look, every religion in the world refers to God as the creator. And it's like, dude, you want to like get close to God? Get creative.
I used to talk about creative financing when I couldn't figure out. I'm like, I'm going to go into creative financing, which meant I was looking beyond only getting a paycheck, only working here or working in that way. So creativity, curiosity, and connection.
I love that. Love that. Melanie, I could talk to you all day.
I know, same here. I love it.
I freaking adore you. I think you're awesome. Listen, I want to do something else with you, another show, or maybe a weekly thing.
Whatever you can, you know how to find me.
I mean, it only took 8 months to get you on this show.
8 weeks, dude.
Oh, 8 weeks. I'm sorry.
But yeah, I would love that. And thank you to everybody who tuned in and posted comments. It's been such a delight. And yeah, we'll be in touch for sure.
Where can they follow you? Where's the best place?
Yep. I love being on Instagram. So people can find me at Mel Klein. That's MELKLEIN. And then my website is Melanie C. Don't forget the C for Connie, MelanieCKlein.com.
MelanieCKlein.com. We'll drop that in the show notes and the comments. And Melanie, you rock. Thank you so much. And we will see. Don't hang up on me yet. We'll see you guys later. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. We'll see you guys later.